mobile network operators on telecoms, data privacy, spectrum policy, and competition policy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Head of Public Policy APAC at GSMA, Ms. Jeanette White.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Our second speaker is a pioneer in forging digital partnership and units with more than 20 years of global experience in wholesale, business, regulatory, and digital transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Head of Asia Pacific at GSMA, Mr. Julian Gorman. All right, so I'll hand over the mics to them. Do you have some?
As head of Asia Pacific for GSMA, GSMA is the global organization uniting digital ecosystem. Our core members are the mobile operators, more than 700 around the world. As I mentioned before, like 300 or 400 more ecosystem players, people like the network vendors like Ericsson or Huawei, but also digital ecosystems such as Google, Meta, are all members. We increasingly have a focus on sectors, economic sectors like fintech, manufacturing, to help drive the transformation that mobile technology is having on economies around the world. And this being the first Digital Nation Summit we've held in the Philippines is a great honor and a reflection of the Philippines historically, I think, has had as voice. The innovation, what's happening here, has not had a loud enough voice on the global stage. In actual fact, so just a couple of weeks ago, Ernest Chu, the CEO of Globe, was appointed to the GSMA board. GSMA board is 25 of the largest and most influential telecoms operators around the world. People like AT&T and Verizon from the US, China Mobile, Jio from India, Vodafone, Deutsche Telekom, and now Globe. Actually, though, about 15 years ago, PLDT was a GSMA board member. And that actually, I mentioned before, when I first started in telecoms, one of the first countries I was looking at when we were looking to do things like mobile money was actually the Philippines, because Philippines was a leader in that state, and even to this day is still a leader. But the world has moved on. 20 years ago, it was about calling people and sending SMS. Now, mobile technology is an enabler of economies around the world. Globally, mobile economy is around 5.5% of the world's economy. In the region, it generates about $800 billion, on its way to about $1 trillion by the end of this decade. And alongside that is the emergence of 5G, or the progress of 5G, which world first was launched in South Korea, so part of Asia Pacific, 5 years ago, and is gradually rolling out across the region. We expected that around the end of the decade or early next decade, about half of the region's users will be using 5G. In countries like Philippines, penetration is still much lower than, say, the advanced markets. So South Korea is passing 60% this year, along with some other advanced markets like Australia and Singapore are well up into the 30s and 40s. But it's countries like Thailand and Philippines who are a bit of a quiet achiever, really. And that's by a number of factors. Thailand, it's a case of culturally and language, it's a bit of a silo in some respects. But they are currently enjoying more than 90% 5G national population coverage and heading past 25-30% 5G adoption. But I mean, Philippines has a long heritage and of innovation, and it's that bringing the Digital Nation Summit to Manila is an expression or a commitment from GSMA that we need to invest more in elevating the voice of the Philippines in a global market, because increasingly, while for the last 20 years it's been possible for mobile industry and digital economy to sort of live in isolation, increasingly it's a global economy, and actually competition across borders is not restricted. The digital economy, the digital ecosystem, our digital lives are not bound by physical boundaries anymore. Even Singapore, head of IMDA in Singapore said a couple of months ago about Singapore being able to extend its economy beyond its limits of its small island. Philippines is a massive country with hundreds of millions, more than 100 million population. It's a complex geography, diverse cultural, social, community, but it's all being enabled by mobile technology. And it's important that we're encouraging an ecosystem and championing an ecosystem that is solving local problems, indigenous problems, with mobile technology as part of that global economy. But also understanding that Philippines competes on a global stage for investment and innovation. Its ports must compete with other regional ports. Its airports compete with other regional airports. Manufacturing, the ability to get Tesla factories or Foxconn factories, things like that are global competition. And it's with that, it's important that the mobile industry is sustainable, prosperous, continue to invest in the infrastructure that is going to support the Philippines achieve its digital potential and deliver those benefits which Darius and Boy outlined on the stage just moments ago about improving the lives of all Filipinos. We are very happy to be here, bring the event here first time. I first came here about 2010. I worked for Qatar Telecom, Ooredoo at the time. They had the WiMAX operation here, White Tribe. I used to come and visit most often. But to be honest, I've been here last as a measure of importance of Philippines to GSMA. I've been here 3 times in the last 6 months. In the 6 years before, I think I came twice. And so that is our commitment. And I think there's a lot of things going on here that will benefit elevating the voice on a global stage, things like Mobile World Congress. But also, one of the things we want to do is be more present, be credible, learn, because there's a lot of things that happen here that have spread around the world. I mean, Gcash, mobile money that came out of the Philippines 25 years ago is now a worldwide phenomenon. We've just done some research, which mobile money was a big push around mobile money was connecting or getting the unbanked banked. In actual fact, the research we've done shows that in places like Philippines and Indonesia, there's still a lot of unbanked, but they have wallets. And actually, they don't want banks. Wallets are much easier. And so the world has actually moved on. The technology has evolved, but our society, our industry and economy has also evolved. And it's as we move from what we call digital societies, which is the conversion of physical to digital. You appreciate digital because you had physical. Actually, you've got kids now who are born into digital. And digital is no longer an incidental skill. It's not an incidental asset in a business. It's not an incidental service to government. It has to be core. And to make that core, you need to have policymakers, the industry come together, and the ecosystem all come together. And that's what we see as the nuggets of success here in the Philippines, which we want to encourage and nurture and grow to make the strong digital Philippines.
Yes, thank you, Julian. I think one of the things, if you were in the auditorium earlier, you will see in front of you the Digital Nations report. And this is a report that we launched for the first time this year in October. And it looks at how 18 countries in Asia Pacific are performing to become a digital nation. And as you can see, and there's 5 pillars. Obviously the first one is infrastructure. Without infrastructure, you've got nothing. We need that infrastructure. But there are 4 other pillars, and those are security. Again, it's very important that we have a secure network, and we've all heard about frauds and scams. We need to make sure that digital trust is maintained. Data governance. Actually, this is where Philippines has been way forward many years ago, because I think this is very much from the business processing outsourcing, where you could have those laws in place to allow data to transfer across borders. The other pillar is innovation and then people skills. Philippines has done very well. It's come 6th in out of 18 countries, just behind New Zealand. So we've got the countries we all talk about, like Korea and Japan, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and then the Philippines. So this is a great foundation, if you like. Obviously, there's things that we need to work with the industry and government to see how we can improve, because it's a long journey. It doesn't stop. It's not a one-off, and every country is improving all the time. So you don't want to come down seconds next time. You want to make sure that you maintain or increase that position, and that is our commitment to being here with GSMA is to have more presence. Not that we don't have presence here. We have a lot of we work with the mobile operators, and they're part of many of our events, and also have information, and we like on policy forums and things like that. So they're very active on those as well.
In the Philippines, there's high mobile phone penetration, but then there's a lag when it comes to mobile internet usage, around 45%. What are the challenges in the Philippines in particular that you would say attributes to the lag?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that the Digital Nation report highlights the Philippines is where they're, let's say, not performing as well, is around infrastructure. So population coverage, or what we call the coverage gap, so the amount of population not covered is quite high in the Philippines compared to other countries. Like Indonesia, by example, Indonesia is well into the 90s, I think Philippines is in the high 70s. So that's quite a large coverage gap. And globally, we're talking about coverage gap of only 2 or 3, 4% as an average. So there's a lot of population who are not covered. Then you have the usage gap. That's what we call where you have coverage, but you're not using mobile broadband. There's famous studies about increase of 5% in mobile broadband is like a 1% boost on your GDP. So there's a direct link between getting people connected. Because getting people connected allows them access to education, health, open business, things like that. So the question is, why is Philippines lagging there? So on the coverage gap, it's clearly a complex geography. They had the NTN links talking before about how satellite technology is changing, and that's providing more options for operators moving forward to cover the coverage gap. But the usage gap is also still high. Now that is not unique to the Philippines. Countries of similar GDPs or maturities and economy, in that same sort of ballpark. Some are a lot worse. I mean, to honestly look at places like Pakistan and Bangladesh, it's much further behind. It is a challenge often across the region that device cost or the cost of usage is seen as a barrier. And that clearly is a contributor factor. But it's also what can you do with the device. Perception of price is the value received. And I think Philippines is known for being quite cost conscious when it comes to users. And so I think there's more work that GSMA needs to do about what's specifically in the Philippines around this way. But I think it's also important that we are building the services that helping change people's lives. So encouraging the innovation. And that's also another area where Philippines is not performing as well as, say, cybersecurity or data governance. And I think as we look forward to building digital nations, it's closing that coverage gap and closing that usage gap that are priorities. Because inclusive digital nations, so everybody being able to get online and participate, it has to be a key objective of digital nations. I think it's not a one single recipe, it's not like a single pill will solve that thing. It's about bringing the policymakers, the regulators, the industry and the ecosystem together in a mutual vision, consistent vision. And we've seen countries across Asia Pacific really change their trajectory. Places like Thailand, India, as some examples of where the policymakers come and they remove some of the barriers. Like one of the bigger barriers to infrastructure rollout here is rights of way. The time to get deploy infrastructure and the cost of deploying infrastructure. Removing the barriers to the infrastructure being available, making sure that the services are available to change people's lives, and so the innovation ecosystem is rich and nurtured is important. And I think we see positive steps, and I think as Philippines looks forward towards the end of the decade. You know, your government here is in to basically to the end of the decade, setting strong visions about inclusion and digital nations. That's encouraging sign. There's a lot of work to be done. I mean, John Garrity on the stage mentioned before about spectrum as well and some other barriers. It's about making those steps, those big bold steps, and getting those obstacles out of the way to help the infrastructure roll out, to nurture the innovation ecosystem to solve that problem.
Good morning, I'm Gonzalez from Data Trade. My question is one will be for GSM, the other one will be for governance. I've seen how the GSM started when we have the big SIM cards, calling card size, and then the phones you weren't able to use other countries because of prohibitions. Then Smart and Globe started roaming around the world. Now we have eSIM. What's the next about technology that GSMA is able to help in terms of probably patents or laws? And are there things that you wish you could have covered, or some countries that are not yet part of the GSMA alliance? And then for the broadband spectrum, how are other countries able to manage the inclusion from Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6, and then are there governance laws that they use to enhance this? Because all of the technology providers like Ericsson and Huawei always depend on those governing laws.
So I'm going to let Jeanette have the spectrum question. The first one, you're right, GSMA was set up really to drive roaming and interoperability. So those early days where you couldn't roam around the world, things like that, that's all sort of settled now, has a managed framework. The big technology program at GSMA at the moment is called Open Gateway. Open Gateway is about unlocking the power of the networks so the ecosystem can thrive. This was launched 2 years ago in Barcelona. At the moment, mobile operators covering about 75% of the world's population have signed up to committed to it. So PLDT and Globe have committed in July this year. They look to launch APIs under the program. But the Open Gateway program is about standardized APIs across the world to reduce the cost for the ecosystem to engage with the network. And so in the same way you buy a SIM card and you can roam around the world, the Open Gateway program is about you can connect to a single API and connect to the world's network. And the very sexy tagline is unlocking the power of the Earth's networks to the cloud. Because innovation ecosystem happens on the cloud now, largely around the world. And it's about exposing the power of the network. And because with 5G, the network becomes very programmable. It's a lot more cloud-defined. So things like quality on demand, edge slicing on demand. But actually what we're seeing here in Southeast Asia at the moment, the launch priorities are around APIs that help mitigate scams and frauds or digital identity risk online. And so GSMA established in July, we launched in Singapore a thing called the APAC FinTech Forum, which Philippines is part of and mobile operators are part of, which is about deploying a portfolio of APIs that help the digital or mobile economy manage risk, scams, frauds, identity risk online, to preserve and protect digital trust. And so those APIs, though, of 4 or 5 APIs, are part of a portfolio of more than 40 APIs that have already been specified, are being launched around the world. And what we see from here is that portfolio will only grow in strength, will become universal or global. And in a sense, everyone receives an SMS OTP for whatever reason nowadays. That is the original mobile operator API. And actually, if you say, what do I regret? Is 20 years ago or so, I tried to sell SMS OTP to banks. That was when SMS OTP was very first thing. It took 10 years for it to really become a global phenomenon. Now everybody knows what SMS OTP is. In actual fact, the world is moving on so much that actually SMS OTPs are starting to be, there's also alternates, you know, in-app OTPs and all sorts of things. So my regret is actually once we deployed SMS OTP, we didn't move on and deploy all these other APIs because they could have been done years ago. And to be honest, the industry there is operators around the world who have deployed some of these APIs in some local proprietary method. But the power of Open Gateway is global standard, single connection. So that should accelerate the ecosystem and the potential for the mobile network to become part of or unlock another era of innovation.
SMS code generators were very expensive then.
Good point.
A follow-up. Has there been a case that the GSMA has helped prevent a big crime? Because, you know, mobile phones are very useful with the power of data and roaming, and it can be used by any criminal, you know, probably to alarm a bomb or something, or you know, all of those things.
So GSMA doesn't operate a network ourselves. We don't sell anything to consumers or business ourselves. But what we do is we do provide services to operators, things like IMEI database. So we issue IMEIs and tags, which are the numbers that sit in devices, to OEMs, device manufacturers. And so what we do is we help governments and we help industry by using that data. An example would be, so in Australia at the moment, they've just turned off the 3G network. Now some older devices cannot call emergency services. And so those devices are identified by IMEI or TAC number. And GSMA provides the database to the Australian government and to the Australian industry so that they know which devices can and can't call emergency services, as an example. In other countries like Indonesia or Pakistan, we provide that sort of data to the government so that they can protect from grey imports or the reselling of stolen devices. So we have a lost and stolen device database as well.
So,
yes.
or smuggled devices.
What was it?
Or smuggled devices.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and also prevent grey routing so that the country is getting their import taxes and whatever, and ensuring that devices coming into the country are fit for use. So I can't point to a single instance where we prevented a bank robbery or something or other, but actually mobile operators themselves do have examples of doing that. I mean, when I worked for Vodafone, I had to mention it, but I mean, there was a bombing in Bali. We helped the Australian government solve problems around that device. So it's an ecosystem that works together.
Hi.
You did have a spectrum question.
Yeah. Okay, well, as you saw today, did you see Dr. Gower's presentation where he talked about using 5G? So we really do need 5G for the future. So to do that, we need a spectrum roadmap. And the mechanism in which we make sure that there is like a standardisation is the WRC process. So last year it was agreed that was the process, it happens every 4 years. And what we need to ensure is that there is sufficient spectrum, 5G spectrum for the Philippines, for every country. And to do that, we need a spectrum roadmap. And there are spectrum bands where, the mobile industry wants, and so does the Wi-Fi community want. So what we need to do is to ensure that there is sufficient spectrum in those bands so that the Philippines operators can have that spectrum to deliver in the future. Because, some of these bands are 3.5 gigahertz at one time nobody wanted that. Now it's beachfront. Same with 6 gigahertz as well. So that's an area of, that's needed. So both, we need IoT, 5G spectrum, and yes, there is a role for Wi-Fi as well. So we need to come together. GSMA works very closely with the operators and government to work on spectrum roadmaps. And this year we will be, going into next year, we'll be doing more work here in the Philippines to ensure there is a spectrum roadmap that will meet the needs of the Philippines.
Hello, I'm Lawrence Mersigan from the Business Mirror. I just have a clarification and a question. The clarification is you mentioned that there is a coverage gap of around 70% in the Philippines. Is that correct?
It's around 30%. So population coverage is in the high 70%. So
Okay.
the coverage gap is about 20.
Okay. but the operators are reporting that they have 95% coverage of the total population in the Philippines, both Smart and Globe. As for Tito, it's around 87 based on their commitment to the government. Would you say that those numbers are not accurate, given what you mentioned?
No, I think it's more likely that my number is inaccurate. But the coverage gap is here larger than some other regional markets. And I think it's the complex geography and how you determine population coverage. So I'd say that maybe there's a job for GSMA to resolve with the operators the numbers. But you know, it's I think the complex geography is the challenge for the Philippines.
Okay. For my question, you mentioned earlier that with its long heritage of innovation, the Philippines can achieve its digital potential through those that were written here in this report. Can you quantify that digital potential that you mentioned?
I think it's an ever-moving destination. The one thing is, I think 20 years ago, mobile technology was expected to be, just launch 3G, one more capex round. I think the mobile industry now knows that, and the world knows, that actually infrastructure the demand for the infrastructure continues to grow. So by the end of the decade, across Asia Pacific, the average usage of data per customer will increase by a factor, depending on the country, somewhere between 2 and 5 times. We've got countries in Asia Pacific by the end of this decade are expecting to be used about 60 or 70 gigabytes per month. And the demand doesn't seem to be slowing down significantly. So the other thing I'd say is digital skills, as an example, is historically been seen as could you turn the phone on, could you make a phone call, could you send an SMS. Digital skills now are can you protect yourself? Can you be safe online? So actually, when you say how to quantify, it's actually accepting that this is a journey, and actually each country competes on a global stage for innovation investment, and that's why we have the index in our Digital Nations report, and we used to have an index in the Digital Societies report, because it's really more about calibrating against other regions or other nations, how you were going in that progress. Because 20 years ago, I stood in front of the King of Spain and showed him that you could download a song in a minute. And he said, what else does it do? And I said, I don't know, maybe email. Now, we're all holding smartphones. I'm guessing the average app per phone is around 20 or 30 nowadays. 5 or 10 years ago, it was about half that. The amount of the person's lives that have moved to digital, whether it's your banking, your news, your social media, your connecting, is actually exponentially growing. So what we say now is the destination. Actually, in 5 years' time, the destination is going to be moved. Meta's chief of AI said a couple of months ago that within 10 years, the smartphone will be dead or obsolete. And if you put on a pair of Meta's glasses, that's got the built-in AI and everything else, you start to believe, you can start to understand, actually, I don't need a smartphone most of the time. I can walk around, I can talk, I can interact via voice. And there's going to be other form factors, which will drive a new need for skills. Even interacting with AI is a new skill. I guarantee all you guys here have used Gen AI. We all do. It's all made us better. But it just moves the bar higher, and we keep taking that journey. So I don't think quantifiable, comparison-wise, we can see, and that's why we say Philippines are doing quite well. 6 in our index of 18 countries.
But can you maybe measure how much the digital potential, maybe in dollars?
Well, also, by the end of this decade, we see that the mobile economy, so not the digital economy, but the mobile economy, sitting around 5.5% across the region. 5.5% across the region, around $1 trillion in Asia Pacific. Globally, much more than that. Globally, by the end of the decade, we expect 5G mobile economy is about $1 trillion. In Asia Pacific, it's only about 180 billion. So it's proportionally to population, you could say APAC are lagging. But in APAC, you've got leaders and you've got followers. And the challenge in Asia Pacific is the diversity. And it's for each country to find their own journey, navigate their own path to deliver the economic benefits. Because in the past, mobile industry was measured by some very basic KPIs, population coverage, speed of the network, or things like that. In the future, actually, it's more about the transformation, the economic benefit, the social benefit, which then means, okay, what does that mean for the network? Actually, it's more about coverage or performance where you need it. Do I need to have 6G nationwide? Well, I don't know. Do I need high capacity in my national stadium so that when people are watching a national football game, that they can all connect and they can do what they want? That's important. Do I need to be able to connect 100,000 people, at my local football ground? Probably not. So that's where the potential is more about comparison. I think Philippines is on a good track. Infrastructure, innovation needs to be worked on. But that's what we're here collectively to do.
One of the points that was said earlier today is about the youthful population in the Philippines, and that is a really great opportunity, but it requires an access and use of the systems. So that's why the digital nation presents the 5 pillars. You can't, all of them are very important, and that's what will grow the economy and the digital economy. And again, if that's all to do with working with the whole of government, not just the ICT, but as you heard today, what's happening in the medical side. That requires then collaboration with the health ministries to ensure that things can work together. So that whole of government approach, together with those 5 pillars, is something that will grow opportunities. And you don't want to we can't necessarily quantify it. We'll have a look about what we can do in that in the future, but it's a growth trajectory.
The Secretary mentioned before, cybersecurity index. There's lots of different ways, different dimensions to measure a nation. No single measure. But the thing is, how do you move the needle? And I think, coming together, the policymakers, the ecosystem, the operators, to commit to that vision of an inclusive digital nation is a big bold step.
Good afternoon. Marlet Sarasaro from Manila. I'm reading the report, and it was mentioned that there will be a fresh round of a new wave of investments in 5G. Where will these investments go? Will be developing new use cases or strengthening infrastructure? And in terms of use cases, what use cases are we seeing in the coming years?
Sure. So I think the first round of 5G was dominated by the countries like China, Korea, Japan, the advanced nations, high ARPU, high smartphone penetration, things like that. What we're seeing now is the intermediate countries in entering 5G era. And India is a great example of actually rewriting, I think, the 5G playbook. Low ARPU, actually, smartphone penetration relatively low, broadband penetration relatively low. But what they did is, in the last 5 years, they removed a lot of the regulatory and policy roadblocks to a fast rollout. India now enjoys, I think, one of the globally the fastest 5G standalone rollout, largest 5G standalone network. And you're seeing it creating local solutions for local problems. I mentioned before that you also need to keep in mind, though, that nations compete for innovation and investment. Philippines ports compete with other regional ports for traffic and for import export. And countries like China and Singapore are rewriting the benchmark of what is an efficient port by the adoption of 5G. And so that benchmarking is now moving around the world. I went to a factory in India not so long ago where they were making aluminium parts for Hyundai, Mercedes, and Kia, and a few other international car manufacturers. That factory it wasn't too far. I was out of Chennai. It wasn't too far from the city, but to be honest, it seemed like it was quite rural. Is building a new 5G factory 10 times the size of their last factory because they are competing on a global stage. Their parts they make are exported around the world for those car manufacturers. And that is what we see as the difference in the intermediate countries is there will be a need for 5G investment to solve those globally competitive economic assets. And that will also help encourage or nurture local innovation to solve local problems. Education, health, as examples. Dr. Gao talked about 5G in a hospital this morning. There's no reason that those hospitals can't be around the world. As he mentioned, he's working with a hospital in Ghana. Doesn't even have 5G yet. But the innovation was driven by 5G in Singapore. And that's what we're seeing is the spread of innovation and ideas to solve local problems.
Sorry, one here, and then I'll go over there.
Hi, good morning. Sorry I arrived late. My name is Reg of Digital Reg. I guess this is related with GSMA. We have this SIM registration here in the Philippines, which was implemented, I think it was last year. And my question is, how do you think? What do you think? What do you think about our SIM registration compared to other countries? Do you think it's effective? Because for most of us here in the Philippines, we think that it's ineffective because in spite of having this SIM registration implemented, we are still getting spam text messages. We are still getting our information are still being fished through these text messages. What can you say about this?
So I think a SIM registration is part of a complex framework to protect digital trust. And across the world, there's different motivators historically about why SIM registrations happen. National security is often, in many countries, is reason. The challenge in SIM registration is there's the objective, and of course, in a complex, big country with a SIM card, which is available from 7-Eleven and so many outlet stores, it's a complex matter to resolve. But in isolation, it is not the solution to digital trust. Digital trust is about having a framework ecosystem. So being able to have the ecosystem address scams and frauds as they arise, use technology, have the policy. In actual fact, I think we mentioned here on the digital trust and the thing about, we talk about making sure that there's a policy environment, whole of government approach, because many SIM registrations started out as like an ICT, tax type of thing. But now, as part of a digital trust framework, it's ensuring that there's a response to scams and fraud, that there's international cooperation. And that's why we created the APAC FinTech Forum as an example, is to help Southeast Asia unlock the power of mobile operator APIs to help address scams and fraud. But even that is not a panacea, a single pill to solve things. It's around the commitment of the industry and the policymakers in the ecosystem to solve this, but also understanding that digital trust is the responsibility of everyone in this room, everyone in this building, everyone in this country. When you sit at home and you look out your window and you see a stranger in the street and you see your kids playing and you tell your kids, you don't play with strangers, those things, that's you protecting physical trust. It is incumbent that everyone embraces, we need to take the same responsibility in the digital world as well. We need to make sure that the digital world is safe and secure for digital economy, but also for future generations. I would say SIM registration is part of it, and we should continually try to improve that, of course. Because being able to identify the originators, being able to take action against people perpetrating scams and frauds is important. And Philippines is a very important country in that because it's been identified globally as also a host or home of international scams and fraud. And I think one of the things, it's high priority for GSMA. I can tell you at the next GSMA board meeting that scam and frauds and what the industry could work on, we're part of it. And part of that is because Globe's CEO, Ernest Chu, is on the board, and it's a high priority for him, and it's a high priority for the nation.
Hello, Tyrone Piet from Philippine Daily Inquirer. I have a few questions. Earlier, you mentioned that the Philippine telco players need to work on building more infrastructure. So, what more do we need to build on, and how important is it that we do it now? And also, do you see 5G spurring investments in data centers, and why? Thank you.
In infrastructure investment, I think mobile operators, one of the things that's painful for them is a never-ending story. I think we now agree that it's always going to happen. I would say by the end of the decade, data consumption per customer will increase by a big factor. Philippines is also the home of a lot of APAC's remaining organic growth. I mean, just that demographic bubble of youth means that there's a wave of more usage, more demand coming. At some point, that wave will pass through. I mean, Indonesia's wave is about 5 or so years older, I think, than the Philippines, and you see that has come through the industry demand. Obviously, 5G is still rolling out and will continue to roll out. Even though we're 5 years into the 5G era, it's still to us early days, especially in countries like the Philippines. And while there is talk of 6G starting to appear at the end of the decade, 5G by the end of this decade is around half of Philippines users, we estimate, and a little less than that for the region. Globally, it's sitting around 55%. But if you compare, 4G started around 2008. 5G is actually rolling out much quicker than 4G. It took about 7 or 8 years to get to this stage. I think the investment that will continue to grow is to make sure that the 5G will be deployed where it's needed. Because 5G technology is actually more efficient from a power and all the other reasons point of view. So just like you throw out your old TV when you get a new TV because it's better resolution, uses less power and things like that. Actually, mobile technology is very similar. And so there will be this continued investment, and older technologies will start to phase out. Many countries, South Australia's phased out 2 and 3G, things. So Singapore's also got rid of 2 and 3. So countries are starting to phase out older generations. I mean, that's about using the spectrum more efficiently, but also means making infrastructure available. And there's demand for backhaul, the fiber, and the data centers to drive all this rising. And of course, globally, there's a lot of talk about data centers because AI and the need for data centers to support AI is significant. I think somebody mentioned to me last night, a Google search, an old Google search on a term or something or other, compared to an AI search on the same term, is a power factor of about 3 or 4. I don't know how that's true, but it gives you an idea of the compute power difference and the data center demand that countries need to be considering how they're going to create. Because AI is here, it's very tangible, and only seems to be growing.
Perhaps we'd also say cloudification of the network itself, so that's actually meaning, generating more requirements. And what we have found from some research we've done recently is that, as you go to the next generation of network, the quality of service actually improves. So that's another reason, why mobile operators will invest, because they, quality of service is a key competitive differentiator. So, it's always going to be, how can we provide the best service? I think though there's also the point that not everybody does need 5G, so there is, there is, if mobile operators have to invest, judiciously really, to make sure that they can get their return on investment.
I mean, it's important that a nation nurtures a prosperous and sustainable mobile industry that's going to continue to invest. because actually that is a key to competitive success. Competing for innovation investment means that infrastructure needs to continue to be invested in to support that innovation.
Thank you.
From technicpage.com, I've been reading the Digital Nation report. So as you emphasize here, digitalization is now going cross borders. So there's going to be one standard globally. With that, the risk of security is also transnational, as we said. So is there something that GSMA as an organization is helping those nations in terms of mitigating or declining the risk of transnational security breaches?
So a number of levels. First, I mentioned Open Gateway. That's global standardized APIs, so available across the world. And the intent is to roll out across all mobile operators. So that's unlocking the power of the network to help scams and frauds globally. GSMA also has a fraud and security group. It's been around for more than 30 years. And to be honest, was originally set up around fraud and security conducted on the operator. You know, like people like prepaid fraud or things like that. But now we see actually, as mobile technology has become the enabler for the digital economy, actually mobile technology is being used to help scams and frauds across the general population. And GSMA and the industry embraces the responsibility to participate with that. And so I know there's aside from looking at digital nations, protection of digital trust, we have the APAC FinTech Forum, which is specifically aimed on Southeast Asia, and there are creating initiatives. As mentioned, the board and things like that, around how do we work together as a global industry. And we work with groups, multiple operators who work across groups. I mean, Globe is part of the Singtel family. We have other global groups, Vodafone, Deutsche, who are all involved and have their operations transnationally. But GSMA as an association, as a global association, scams and fraud is right at the top of the list. Is how do we work together, not just in the technology, but how is the technology being used? Because a lot of scams and frauds is social engineering. Somebody ringing you up and somehow getting your password out of you, or getting to what they call, in the UK they call it authorized push payments. So in actual fact, to everything else, it's actually a person conducting the transaction, but they've been socially engineered to do that. And GSMA accepts that actually we have potential, there could be things in the network to help detect or manage or alert to the risk. So in Australia, one of the banks there, Commonwealth Bank, when somebody sets up a new biller and then immediately conducts an unusual looking transaction, the bank checks with the local operator about, is the person on the call? Is that, because that may be somebody's doing social engineering play. And that's where in the UK they have the operators provide a service, an API called Scam Caller, and that's where the banks, when they see an unusual transaction, can ask the operators, dip the API and find out, is the smartphone in the proximity of the transaction, is the person on the call, and they call it Scam Caller because it identifies some risk factors which the bank can then take into account to help remove the scam and the fraud. Because actually mobile operators don't know what's happening in the voice call. We can just see the transaction, but we can maybe, if the bank says, I think this is a fraud, can you check on this customer? Actually, there might be information we can expose, and that's what Open Gateway program is looking at.
Maybe I could say something about the international side of things. So what the GSMA is very good at is convening the industry and also the policymakers. So we had our regional conference in Seoul just last month, and we convened the industry there to share best practice, and one of them was about digital trust. So we had policymakers, regulators, operators in a forum there where we showed best practice, showed things. We also have closed door sessions with government because that's when they can open up a little bit more about sharing, and we will then take those learnings. So what we learn from here today, we will take to our next event. So it's always a journey. We learn from each person, each event or any interaction we have. And the other thing that we do on an international basis is we write reports where we can show and demonstrate what works. We have our Mobile World Conference in 1st to 3rd of March next year, and there yes, and that is the biggest convener of policymakers outside of the United Nations. So that's where the policymakers come together, and we've got a number of panels, sessions there, looking at this particular issue of scams and frauds. And that's what we can do, is learn from each other. International collaboration is essential, and sharing best practice.
We have another mic now.